the depths of a London morgue during the harsh winter of 1943, a man named Bentley Purchase received one of the most unusual requests in the history of warfare. The coroner had been quietly asked by British intelligence to keep watch for a very specific type of corpse. Not just any body would do. They needed a man of the right age, recently deceased, with no family to ask questions, and whose death could plausibly be explained as drowning. What they were planning was so audacious, so seemingly impossible, that even its architects wondered if they had gone too far. The body they eventually found belonged to a homeless Welsh drifter named Glyndwr Michael. Born in 1909 in the small mining town of Aberbargod, his life had been a series of disappointments and struggles. His father, a coal miner, had taken his own life when Glyndwr was just 15. His mother died when he was 31. With no steady work and nowhere to turn, he had drifted to London, joining the ranks of the city's homeless population during some of the darkest days of World War II. On a cold January night in 1943, Glyndwr Michael was found unconscious in an abandoned warehouse near King's Cross Station. He had consumed bread laced with rat poison. Whether intentionally or by accident, no one would ever know. The phosphorus-based poison caused agonizing internal damage, and after 2 days of suffering in St. Pancras Hospital, he died alone, unknown, and unloved. His death certificate listed the cause as phosphorus poisoning, noting simply that he had taken rat poison while of unsound mind. In life, Glyndwr Michael had achieved nothing of note. He was, as one intelligence officer would later coldly observe, a bit of a ne'er-do-well whose only worthwhile contribution would come after his death. But in death, this forgotten man would become the most unlikely hero of World War II, playing a role that would save thousands of Allied lives and help change the course of history itself. What Glyndwr Michael's lifeless body was about to become part of was Operation Mincemeat, perhaps the most successful single deception operation of the entire war. A plan so intricate, so dependent on human psychology and careful detail that it would fool Adolf Hitler himself and redirect the course of Nazi military strategy at one of the war's most crucial moments. But to understand how a homeless man's corpse became the key to Allied victory in the Mediterranean, we need to step back to the strategic situation facing the Allies in early 1943. The tide of war was beginning to turn. After years of devastating defeats and desperate defense, the Allies had finally achieved their first major victory against the Axis powers in North Africa. German and Italian forces had been driven from Tunisia, and suddenly, for the first time, the Allies found themselves in a position to take the offensive. Prime Minister Winston Churchill, who had long advocated for attacking what he called Europe's soft underbelly, saw an opportunity to strike at the weakest point in the Axis defences. The obvious target was Sicily, the triangular island at the toe of Italy. Capturing Sicily would secure Allied control of the Mediterranean, provide airfields for bombing the Italian mainland, and potentially knock Italy out of the war entirely. But therein lay the problem. Sicily was so obviously the next target that, as Churchill himself admitted, everyone but a bloody fool would know that's where the Allies were headed. Hitler and his generals would see the attack coming from miles away. They would have time to reinforce the island, position their forces, and turn what should have been a swift victory into a costly bloodbath. The German and Italian defenders already had significant forces on Sicily, including experienced troops who had been withdrawn from North Africa. If they were allowed to concentrate their full defensive strength on the island, the Allied invasion could face disaster. Tens of thousands of British, American, and Canadian soldiers could die on the beaches, and the entire Mediterranean strategy could collapse. What the Allies needed was a way to convince Hitler that Sicily was not the real target. They needed him to look elsewhere, to divide his forces, to send his best troops to defend places the Allies had no intention of attacking. This was the birth of Operation Barclay, a a comprehensive deception campaign designed to misdirect German attention away from Sicily. The concept wasn't entirely new. Military deception had been practiced for centuries, and the British had already achieved some success with smaller-scale deceptions earlier in the war. But nothing had been attempted on this scale, and nothing had stakes quite this high. The success or failure of Operation Barclay could determine whether the Allied Mediterranean offensive succeeded or failed catastrophically. Multiple deception operations were planned as part of Barclay. False radio traffic would suggest massive troop concentrations in Egypt, preparing for an invasion of Greece. Fictional army units would be created on paper and their presence suggested through carefully orchestrated intelligence leaks. Maps of Greece and the Balkans would be purchased in unusual quantities, and Greek interpreters would be hired in suspicious numbers. But the centerpiece of the deception would be something far more ambitious and risky. It would be an operation so audacious that its very outrageousness might make it believable. An operation that would require not just sophisticated intelligence work, but the kind of theatrical imagination that borders on madness. The idea had first been proposed in 1939 by Lieutenant Commander Ian Fleming, who was then working as assistant to the Director of Naval Intelligence. Fleming, who would later create James Bond, had written a memorandum comparing wartime deception to fly fishing. Just as a fisherman must present the right lure at the right time to fool a wary trout, he argued, intelligence officers must present information in ways that make the enemy want to believe it. Among Fleming's 54 suggestions for deceiving the enemy was number 28, allowing the Germans to discover a corpse carrying false plans. The idea was simple in concept, but devilishly complex in execution. A dead body, dressed as a military courier, would be found by the enemy, carrying documents that revealed false Allied intentions. If the Germans believed the documents were genuine, they would act on the false information. When the time came to implement Operation Barclay, Fleming's corpse idea seemed perfect for the Sicily problem. If a body could be found carrying documents suggesting that the Allies planned to invade Greece and Sardinia, with Sicily merely a feint, it might convince Hitler to redirect his forces away from the real target. The task of developing this plan fell to two of British intelligence's most creative minds, Lieutenant Commander Ewen Montagu and Flight Lieutenant Charles Cholmondeley. Montagu was a brilliant lawyer who had been recruited into naval intelligence early in the war. Cholmondeley was an eccentric RAF officer who, despite having never actually flown a plane, had developed a reputation for innovative thinking about deception operations. Together, they began working on what they initially called the Trojan Horse Plan, though it would eventually be renamed Operation Mincemeat. The basic concept seemed straightforward. Obtain a suitable corpse, dress it as a British officer, provide it with identity documents and personal effects, attach a briefcase full of false intelligence, and arrange for it to be discovered by the enemy in circumstances that would make the documents appear genuine. But as Montagu and Cholmondeley began working through the details, they quickly realized they were embarking on one of the most complex deception operations ever attempted. Every aspect had to be perfect. The slightest error, the smallest detail that didn't ring true, could expose the entire operation, and worse, could alert the Germans that they were being deceived about Sicily. The first challenge was finding a suitable body. This proved far more difficult than anyone had anticipated. They needed a corpse of the right age to be plausible as a military officer, recent enough that decomposition wouldn't be too advanced, and critically, belonging to someone with no living relatives who might ask awkward questions. Montagu reached out to Coroner Bentley Purchase, explaining that he needed a body for a special purpose, but could not reveal the details. Purchase understood that this was connected to the war effort and agreed to help. For weeks, he examined every corpse that came through his morgue, looking for one that might serve. Most bodies were unsuitable for various reasons. Some were too old, others too young, Some had died in ways that would be obvious upon medical examination. Others had families who would certainly notice if their loved one's body disappeared. The search stretched on for months, and Montagu began to worry that they might never find what they needed. Then, on January 28, 1943, Purchase contacted Montagu with the news that he had located a suitable candidate. The body was that of Glyndwr Michael, the homeless man who had died from rat poison. Purchase had investigated and confirmed that Michael had no known relatives and no friends who might inquire about his fate. The small amount of phosphorus in his system would not be detectable after several days in seawater, making his death appear consistent with drowning. When Montagu first saw the body, he was concerned that the undernourished corpse didn't look like a fit military officer. But Purchase reassured him, noting that the man didn't need to look like a frontline soldier, only a staff officer who spent most of his time behind a desk. More importantly, the body could be preserved in the morgue refrigerator at just the right temperature, cold enough to prevent decay, but not so cold as to cause obvious freezing damage. With a corpse secured, Montagu and Cholmondeley faced their next challenge, creating a believable identity for their fictional officer. This wasn't simply a matter of providing a name and rank. They needed to construct an entire life, complete with personality, relationships, and the kind of personal details that would convince anyone examining the body that this had been a real person. They decided to call him William Martin and give him the rank of acting major in the Royal Marines. The rank was important, senior enough that he could plausibly be carrying sensitive documents, but not so senior that German intelligence would already know who he was. The Royal Marines were chosen because their officers wore uniforms that were available off the rack, rather than the made-to-measure uniforms of regular Navy officers. But Major William Martin needed to be more than just a name and a uniform. He needed what intelligence officers call pocket litter, the accumulated debris of daily life that everyone carries with them. This would be crucial to selling the deception, because German intelligence would certainly examine every item found on the body, looking for signs that it might be fake. Montagu and Cholmondeley threw themselves into this task with theatrical enthusiasm. They created a complete life for their fictional major, working out his personality, his relationships, his habits, even his financial troubles. Martin would be engaged to a woman named Pam, and he would carry her photograph in his wallet. He would have an overdraft at Lloyd's Bank and outstanding bills from his tailor. He would be slightly careless with money but devoted to his fiancée. To create Pam's photograph, they approached John Leslie, a 19-year-old clerk working for MI5. Leslie agreed to pose for a photograph that would represent Martin's fiancée, though she later recalled that the whole thing seemed rather like a game at the time. The photograph they took showed an attractive young woman in dark clothing, exactly the sort of picture a lonely officer might carry with him. But a photograph wasn't enough. Martin would need letters from Pam, intimate correspondence that would make their relationship feel real to anyone reading it. These letters would need to capture the voice of a young woman in love, worried about her fiancé's dangerous work, but trying to remain optimistic. They would need to feel authentic, not like intelligence officers trying to write romance. The task of writing Pam's letters fell to one of the female staff members, who created correspondence that was both touching and convincing. The letters spoke of everyday concerns, of wedding plans delayed by the war, of small frustrations and larger fears. One letter mentioned theatre tickets for a show called Strike a New Note, and mentioned that Martin's father disapproved of their engagement. To support these personal details, Martin would carry a variety of pocket litter. There would be a receipt for an engagement ring purchased from a London jeweller, ticket stubs from the theatre performance mentioned in Pam's letter, and bills from his tailor complaining about delayed payments. His wallet would contain the kind of random items anyone might accumulate: business cards, restaurant receipts, and loose change. Even Martin's underwear received attention. Montagu and Cholmondeley wore the clothing themselves to ensure it had the properly worn appearance that would come from regular use. Every detail mattered because they knew that German intelligence would examine everything with the utmost care. but the most crucial elements were the official documents that Martin would carry in his briefcase. These would need to be so convincing that they would fool not just local Spanish authorities, but German intelligence officers and ultimately Hitler himself. The documents would need to appear genuinely secret while containing false information that would redirect German strategy. The centerpiece would be a personal letter from Lieutenant General Sir Archibald Nye, the Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, the commander of British forces in North Africa. This letter would discuss the upcoming Allied operations in terms that suggested Greece and Sardinia were the real targets, with Sicily mentioned only as a diversionary feint. Writing this letter required extraordinary care. It needed to sound like genuine correspondence between two senior generals, discussing real strategic concerns in the informal way that colleagues might communicate. But it also needed to plant false information in a way that didn't seem too obvious. The letter opened with casual personal remarks about mutual acquaintances and routine military appointments, the kind of administrative details that would appear in real correspondence between senior officers. Then it moved to the crucial intelligence, discussing the build-up of forces for operations against Greece and expressing concern about German awareness of Allied intentions towards Sicily. In a masterstroke of reverse psychology, the letter suggested that the Allies stood a very good chance of making the Germans think they would go for Sicily, since it was such an obvious objective. This double bluff was designed to make German intelligence dismiss any evidence of Allied preparations for a Sicily invasion as part of a deception operation. A second letter, ostensibly from Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral Cunningham, would introduce Major Martin as an expert on amphibious operations and make reference to recent lessons learned from the disastrous Dieppe raid. This letter would also contain a seemingly casual joke about sardines, a reference that German intelligence might interpret as code for the island of Sardinia. With the documents prepared and Major Martin's identity complete, Montagu and Cholmondeley faced the challenge of getting their creation to the right place at the right time. The body needed to wash ashore somewhere that would ensure the documents reached German intelligence, but in circumstances that would appear completely natural. They chose the Spanish coast near the port of Huelva for several reasons. The currents in that area would naturally carry a body to shore, making its discovery seem like a genuine accident. Huelva had a German consulate staffed by competent intelligence officers who would certainly examine any documents found on a British officer. The local Spanish authorities were known to be sympathetic to Germany and could be counted on to share information before returning the body to British officials. Spain's position as a neutral country was crucial to the operation's success. Because Spain was officially neutral, the Spanish authorities would be obligated to return Major Martin's body and effects to British representatives. But everyone knew that Spain was friendly to Germany, and that sensitive information had a way of reaching German hands before being returned to the British. The transportation would be handled by HMS Seraph, a submarine that had already distinguished itself in special operations. The Seraph was commanded by Lieutenant Norman Jewell, who had proven himself capable of handling unusual and sensitive missions. The submarine had previously been involved in secret operations, including transporting senior American officers for clandestine meetings with French officials in North Africa. On April 17, 1943, Montagu and Cholmondeley loaded their creation into a specially designed canister, packed with dry ice and marked "Handle with care" optical instruments. The canister was loaded onto a truck and driven north to Scotland, where it would be transferred to HMS Seraph. The crew, who jokingly referred to their mysterious cargo as John Brown's body or their new shipmate Charlie, had no idea they were about to participate in one of the war's most crucial operations. The journey to the Spanish coast took nearly 2 weeks. Throughout the voyage, the dry ice kept Major Martin's body preserved, while the submarine made its way through dangerous waters where German U-boats prowled and enemy aircraft searched for Allied vessels. Lieutenant Jewell had been briefed on the importance of his mission, though even he didn't know all the details of what they were planning. On the night of April 30th, 1943, HMS Seraph surfaced off the Spanish coast near Huelva. The sea was calm, and conditions were perfect for the final act of Operation Mincemeat. In the darkness, Jewel and his officers carefully removed Major Martin's body from its canister and prepared it for its final mission. The briefcase containing the crucial documents was securely chained to Martin's wrist, positioned so that it would be immediately obvious to whoever found the body. The corpse was dressed in full military uniform, complete with insignia, identification papers, and all the personal effects that Montagu and Cholmondeley had so carefully prepared. As they lowered the body into the water, Jewel read the 39th Psalm, a brief moment of dignity for a man who had known little dignity in life. The current began to carry Major Martin towards shore, and HMS Seraph quietly submerged and headed for Gibraltar, where Jewel would send the coded message, "Mincemeat completed." Now everything depended on factors beyond British control. Would the body be found? Would the Spanish authorities notify German intelligence? Would the documents appear genuine enough to fool experienced intelligence officers? Would Hitler believe what he read? The first part of the plan worked exactly as hoped. Early on the morning of April 30th, a Spanish fisherman spotted a body floating near the shore and alerted the local authorities. The Guardia Civil retrieved Major Martin's corpse and immediately noticed the briefcase chained to his wrist, clearly marked as containing important documents. Because Major Martin wore a silver crucifix and St. Christopher's medal, the Spanish authorities correctly identified him as Catholic. This was important because it meant he would receive a proper burial rather than a cursory examination. A local doctor, Dr. Eduardo del Torno, performed a brief autopsy and concluded that the Major had drowned after being in the water for 3 to 5 days, exactly what the Operation Mincemeat planners had hoped for. The crucial question was whether the documents would reach German hands. British officials in Spain immediately began making inquiries about the missing officer, demanding the return of his personal effects. This apparent British anxiety to recover the documents actually helped convince the Spanish that they must contain important information. Unknown to the British at the time, their operation had succeeded even better than they had dared hope. The Spanish authorities did exactly what Montagu and Cholmondeley had predicted. Before returning the documents to the British consulate, they allowed German intelligence officers to photograph their contents. The German agent in Huelva, a competent intelligence officer who operated under diplomatic cover, immediately recognized the potential importance of the documents. He arranged for them to be carefully steamed open, photographed, and then resealed so skillfully that the British would not know they had been examined. Within days, copies of the documents were on their way to Berlin, eventually reaching the desk of Adolf Hitler himself. The Führer, who had always been obsessed with the Balkans and had long feared an Allied attack on Greece, found the documents entirely convincing. Here was proof that his instincts had been correct, that Sicily was indeed a feint, and that the real Allied objective was Greece and the Eastern Mediterranean. The German response was swift and dramatic. Hitler ordered massive reinforcements to be sent to Greece and the Balkans. The crack 1st Panzer Division was moved from France to Greece, along with numerous infantry divisions. Additional forces were sent to Sardinia, and naval units were repositioned to defend against the expected attacks on Greece and Sardinia. Most importantly for the Allies, Sicily received no additional reinforcements. The German and Italian defenders on the island were left with the forces they already had, while their potential reinforcements were scattered across the Eastern Mediterranean, hundreds of miles from where the real battle would be fought. British intelligence confirmed the success of Operation Mincemeat through Ultra, the top-secret program that had broken German encryption codes. Intercepted German communications showed that the false documents had been accepted as genuine, and that Hitler was acting on the information they contained. On May 14, 1943, a decrypt of a German message revealed that Hitler had told Admiral Dönitz that Sicily was not the real Allied target, and that Greece and Sardinia must be reinforced. Additional intercepts showed German forces being redeployed exactly as the Operation Mincemeat planners had hoped. Churchill received a telegram informing him of the operation's success. Mincemeat swallowed rod, line and sinker by the right people, and from the best information, they looked like acting on it. The Prime Minister must have felt considerable satisfaction, knowing that this bizarre plan involving a homeless man's corpse had succeeded in fooling Hitler himself. On July 9, 1943, Operation Husky, the Allied invasion of Sicily, began with the largest amphibious assault in history up to that time. Over 150,000 Allied troops landed on the island, supported by thousands of ships and aircraft. The German and Italian defenders, deprived of the reinforcements that had been sent to defend Greece and Sardinia, were caught completely off guard. The contrast between Allied expectations and reality was dramatic. British planners had expected 10,000 casualties in the first week of fighting, but only about 1,400 Allied soldiers were killed or wounded. The Royal Navy had anticipated losing 300 ships to enemy action, but only 12 were sunk. The campaign that was expected to take 90 days was completed in just 38 days. Even more remarkably, German signals intelligence intercepts showed that Hitler remained convinced that Sicily was a diversion. Even hours after the invasion had begun, German aircraft were being transferred away from Sicily to reinforce Sardinia because Hitler still believed the real attack was coming elsewhere. The success of the Sicily campaign had consequences that extended far beyond the Mediterranean. The rapid Allied victory led directly to the fall of Mussolini's government and Italy's withdrawal from the war. It also convinced Hitler to call off Operation Citadel, the massive German offensive at Kursk, because he needed to keep troops available to defend against what he thought would be the next Allied assault in the Balkans. This meant that Operation Mincemeat contributed not only to Allied success in the Mediterranean, but also to Soviet survival on the Eastern Front. By convincing Hitler to hold back reserves for a Balkan invasion that would never come, the operation helped ensure that the Battle of Kursk would be the last major German offensive of the war. The human cost of the war makes it impossible to calculate exactly how many lives Operation Mincemeat saved, but the numbers suggest it was substantial. The rapid capture of Sicily with minimal casualties meant that thousands of Allied soldiers who might have died on the beaches instead survived to fight another day. The diversion of German forces to the Balkans may have saved even more lives by weakening German defenses elsewhere. But perhaps the most profound impact of Operation Mincemeat was psychological. The operation demonstrated that Hitler and his intelligence services could be fooled, that the supposedly invincible Wehrmacht could be outmaneuvered through clever deception. This lesson would prove invaluable as the Allies planned future operations, including the greatest deception of all, Operation Fortitude, which would hide the true target of D-Day. The success of Mincemeat also validated the role of deception in modern warfare. Previous military leaders had used deception tactically, but Operation Mincemeat showed that strategic deception could influence the outcome of entire campaigns. The techniques developed for the operation would be refined and expanded for future use, ultimately becoming a permanent part of military planning. As for the man at the center of it all, Glyndwr Michael was buried with full military honors in the Nuestra Señora Cemetery in Huelva, Spain, under the name Major William Martin. For decades, his true identity remained unknown, even to the Spanish authorities who had buried him. His gravestone bore the false name and the Latin inscription Dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. It is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. The irony was profound. A man who had achieved nothing in life, who had died forgotten and alone, had posthumously served his country more effectively than most living soldiers. His humble sacrifice had helped change the course of World War II, yet for more than 50 years, no one knew his real name. It wasn't until 1996 that amateur historian Roger Morgan uncovered evidence in the Public Record Office that identified the body as Glyndwr Michael. In 1998, after the British government confirmed his identity, a postscript was added to his gravestone. Glyndwr Michael served as Major William Martin, RM. Finally, the forgotten man received the recognition under his own name. The key figures in Operation Mincemeat went on to distinguished post-war careers. Ewen Montagu became a successful lawyer and eventually a judge, but he never forgot the operation that made his reputation. In 1953, he published The Man Who Never Was, a best-selling account of Operation Mincemeat that became the basis for a popular 1956 film. However, Montagu was careful not to reveal everything about the operation. The role of Ultra in confirming its success remained classified for decades, as did many other details about British intelligence capabilities. The book presented Operation Mincemeat as a wild one-off caper rather than part of a systematic program of strategic deception. Charles Cholmondeley returned to civilian life after the war and rarely spoke about his role in the operation. He lived quietly in the English countryside, content to let others take credit for what he always considered a team effort. Fleming, of course, became famous as the creator of James Bond, drawing on his wartime intelligence experience to create the world's most famous fictional spy. Lieutenant Jewell, the submarine commander who had delivered Major Martin to his final destination, continued his naval career and eventually became a captain. He always spoke fondly of HMS Seraph and its crew, noting that they had participated in some of the war's most unusual and important operations, without ever fully understanding their significance. But the real hero of Operation Mincemeat was a man who never knew he was a hero. Glyndwr Michael, the homeless drifter who died alone in a London hospital, became the most unlikely champion of Allied victory. His death, which had seemed so meaningless at the time, turned out to be the key to one of the most successful military deceptions in history. The story of Operation Mincemeat reveals something profound about the nature of war and sacrifice. Heroes aren't always the people we expect them to be. Sometimes they're ordinary men and women who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. Sometimes they're people who never even know they're making a difference. Glyndwr Michael never volunteered for service, never trained for battle, never chose to give his life for his country. Yet his contribution to victory was as real as that of any soldier who stormed a beach or flew a bombing mission. In death, he became exactly what he had never been in life: someone who mattered, someone whose existence made a difference. The operation also demonstrated the power of imagination and creativity in warfare. While generals and admirals planned massive campaigns involving millions of men, a small group of intelligence officers, armed with nothing but wit, creativity, and a dead body, managed to redirect Hitler's strategy. They proved that in war, as in life, sometimes the most outrageous ideas are the ones that work. Operation Mincemeat succeeded because it understood human nature. The planners knew that people tend to believe what they want to believe, and that the most convincing lies are often those that confirm existing prejudices. Hitler wanted to believe that the Allies would attack the Balkans, so when he was presented with evidence that supported that belief, he accepted it without sufficient scrutiny. The operation also succeeded because of obsessive attention to detail. Every aspect of Major Martin's identity was carefully crafted to withstand examination. His personal effects, his correspondence, even his financial troubles were designed to create a complete and convincing picture of a real person. The planners understood that authenticity lies in the accumulation of small details rather than grand gestures. Perhaps most importantly, Operation Mincemeat succeeded because it was fundamentally an act of theatre. Montagu and Cholmondeley weren't just intelligence officers. They were playwrights, creating a character and a story that would play out on the stage of war. They understood that their audience, the German intelligence service, was sophisticated and skeptical, so their performance had to be flawless. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat extended far beyond World War II. The techniques developed for the operation influenced intelligence work throughout the Cold War, and continue to be studied by military planners today. The operation showed that in an age of technological warfare, human psychology remains the ultimate battlefield. The story has also become part of popular culture, inspiring books, films, and television shows that explore the intersection of espionage and human drama. Each retelling tends to emphasize different aspects of the story, some focusing on the technical challenges of the deception, others on the human cost of war, still others on the moral ambiguity of using a man's death for military purposes. But beneath all the retellings and interpretations lies a simple truth. Sometimes history turns on the smallest hinges. A homeless man's death in a London warehouse, a coroner's willingness to help with an unusual request, the skill of intelligence officers in creating a fictional identity, the professionalism of a submarine crew, the psychology of a dictator. All these seemingly unconnected elements came together to change the course of the war. The beach where Glyndwr Michael's body washed ashore near Glyndwr is peaceful now, popular with tourists who come to enjoy the Spanish sunshine. Few of them know that this quiet stretch of sand was once the landing point for one of history's most important intelligence operations. A plaque commemorates Operation Mincemeat, but most visitors pass by without understanding its significance. In Aberbargod, the Welsh mining town where Glyndwr Michael was born, a memorial now honours him as Wydyn na fu erioed, the man who never was. The inscription acknowledges both his real identity and his fictional role, recognising that sometimes the most important truths can only be told through lies. The cemetery in Glyndwr, where Major Martin was buried, has become a pilgrimage site for those interested in World War II history. His grave, now properly identified with both his real and fictional names, serves as a reminder that heroism comes in many forms. Some heroes charge into battle, others simply happen to be in the right place at the right time, even in death. Operation Mincemeat also serves as a reminder of the moral complexity of war. The operation required the use of a dead man's body without the consent of any living relatives, the creation of elaborate lies, and the manipulation of neutral countries for military advantage. By conventional standards, many aspects of the operation were ethically questionable at best. Yet the operation also saved thousands of lives and contributed to the defeat of one of history's most evil regimes. The lives saved by the successful invasion of Sicily included not only Allied soldiers, but also the countless civilians who might have suffered under continued Nazi occupation. In the moral calculus of war, Operation Mincemeat must be judged a clear victory for the forces of freedom and justice. The operation also highlighted the often overlooked role of intelligence work in modern warfare. While popular culture tends to focus on dramatic battles and heroic individual actions, Operation Mincemeat showed that wars can be won through careful planning, psychological insight, and creative thinking. The men and women who fought the war in shadows and silence were just as important as those who fought with guns and bombs. This lesson became increasingly relevant as warfare evolved throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. In an age of information warfare, cyber attacks, and global terrorism, the principles demonstrated by Operation Mincemeat, understanding your enemy, controlling information, and using deception to achieve strategic goals, continue to be relevant. The story of Operation Mincemeat also demonstrates the power of international cooperation in achieving military objectives. The operation required coordination between British intelligence, the Royal Navy, Spanish authorities, and ultimately relied on the predictable behaviour of German intelligence services. Success depended not just on British planning, but on understanding and manipulating an entire network of international relationships. As we look back on Operation Mincemeat more than 80 years later, it's striking how many of its elements seem almost impossible to replicate in the modern world. The level of secrecy required for the operation would be much harder to maintain in an age of instant global communication and social media. the kind of detailed physical deception that fooled 1940s investigators might not survive modern forensic science. Yet the fundamental principles underlying the operation remain as relevant as ever. Understanding human psychology, crafting convincing narratives, and using an opponent's expectations against them are timeless elements of strategic thinking. In many ways, Operation Mincemeat was less about the specific techniques of 1940s espionage and more about eternal truths of conflict and competition. The operation also reminds us that individual actions, even by people who seem insignificant, can have enormous consequences. Glyndwr Michael probably never imagined that his death would affect the course of world history. Bentley Purchase, the coroner who helped find the right body, was just doing his duty to support the war effort. John Leslie, who posed for Major Martin's photograph, thought she was participating in an amusing game. None of them could have predicted that their small contributions would combine to create one of the war's most successful operations. This is perhaps the most profound lesson of Operation Mincemeat. We never know when our actions, however small they seem at the time, might prove to have consequences far beyond what we can imagine. The story of Operation Mincemeat is ultimately a story about the power of human creativity and determination in the face of seemingly impossible odds. When confronted with the challenge of convincing Hitler to look away from Sicily, a small group of intelligence officers came up with a solution so audacious that it seemed like fantasy. Yet through careful planning, meticulous attention to detail, and not a little luck, they made their fantasy into reality. In an age when warfare was increasingly dominated by massive industrial production and technological innovation, Operation Mincemeat proved that human ingenuity and psychological insight could still change the course of history. It showed that sometimes the most powerful weapons are not bombs or bullets, but ideas carefully crafted and skillfully deployed. The men who planned Operation Mincemeat understood something that military leaders throughout history have sometimes forgotten: that war is fundamentally a human endeavor, shaped by human fears, desires, and preconceptions. By understanding their enemy's psychology better than their enemy understood himself, they were able to achieve a victory that no amount of military force could have guaranteed. Today, as we face new forms of conflict and competition in an increasingly complex world, the lessons of Operation Mincemeat remain remarkably relevant. The operation demonstrated that success often depends not on overwhelming force, but on understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. The technical aspects of the operation, while fascinating, were less important than the psychological insights that made it work. Montagu and Cholmondeley succeeded because they understood that Hitler wanted to believe in a Balkan invasion, that German intelligence officers would be thorough but not necessarily skeptical enough, and that Spanish officials could be counted on to act in predictable ways. These insights required deep knowledge of their opponents' cultures, personalities, and institutional behaviors. The planners spent months studying German intelligence procedures, Spanish political attitudes, and Hitler's strategic obsessions. They succeeded because they did their homework, understanding not just what their enemies might do, but why they would do it. This kind of deep cultural and psychological understanding remains crucial in modern conflicts, whether they involve traditional military operations, economic competition, or information warfare. The specific techniques of Operation Mincemeat may be obsolete, but the underlying approach of understanding and exploiting opponent psychology remains timeless. The operation also highlighted the importance of patience and long-term thinking in strategic planning. Operation Mincemeat wasn't a quick fix or a desperate gamble. It was the result of years of careful preparation and months of detailed execution. The planners understood that changing an enemy's strategic thinking requires time, and that the most effective deceptions are those that confirm existing beliefs rather than challenging them. In our age of instant communication and rapid decision-making, this lesson about the value of patience and thorough preparation is especially important. The most successful strategic initiatives are often those that unfold slowly, building credibility over time rather than seeking immediate dramatic results. The collaborative nature of Operation Mincemeat also offers lessons for modern organizations. The operation succeeded because it brought together people with different skills and perspectives: lawyers, military officers, pathologists, writers, and submarine crews. Each contributor played a crucial role, and the operation succeeded because their diverse talents were effectively coordinated. This kind of cross-functional collaboration is increasingly important in modern warfare, business, and other competitive endeavors. Complex challenges require diverse expertise, and success often depends on the ability to coordinate specialists from different fields toward common objectives. The story of Glyndwr Michael serves as a powerful reminder that every individual has the potential to make a difference, even if they never know it. His contribution to victory came not through any conscious choice or heroic action, but simply through being in the right place at the right time. This suggests that we should never underestimate the potential historical significance of seemingly ordinary people and events. The moral dimensions of Operation Mincemeat continue to provoke discussion and debate. The operation involved deception on a massive scale, the use of a dead body without family consent, and the manipulation of neutral countries for military advantage. Yet it also saved thousands of lives and contributed to the defeat of a regime that represented one of history's greatest evils. This moral complexity reflects the broader ethical challenges of warfare and international relations. Sometimes achieving important objectives requires methods that would be unacceptable in peacetime. The challenge for military and political leaders is to ensure that such methods are used only when absolutely necessary, and that they serve genuinely important purposes. The long-term secrecy surrounding Operation Mincemeat also raises questions about transparency and public accountability in democratic societies. Many aspects of the operation remained classified for decades, preventing public discussion of its methods and implications. While operational secrecy was certainly necessary during the war, the extended classification of historical information raises questions about when and how democratic societies should discuss their intelligence activities. The gradual revelation of Operation Mincemeat's details has enriched our understanding of World War II and provided valuable insights into the role of intelligence work in modern conflict. This suggests that there is value in eventually declassifying historical intelligence operations, allowing scholars and the public to learn from both their successes and failures. The technological aspects of Operation Mincemeat, while primitive by modern standards, demonstrated principles that remain relevant in the digital age. The operation succeeded through careful attention to detail, understanding of how information flows through bureaucratic systems, and exploitation of human psychological biases. These same principles apply to modern information operations, whether they involve cybersecurity, social media manipulation, or traditional espionage. The operation also highlighted the importance of physical evidence in an age when most intelligence was still transmitted through paper documents. The authenticity of Major Martin's personal effects was crucial to the operation's success, demonstrating that even in an increasingly digital world, physical evidence retains special psychological power. As we reflect on Operation Mincemeat in the context of modern warfare, it's worth considering how similar operations might be conducted today. Modern forensic science would make it much harder to use an actual corpse convincingly, and global communications would make it more difficult to maintain the kind of secrecy that surrounded the original operation. Yet the fundamental challenge addressed by Operation Mincemeat, convincing an enemy to deploy forces in the wrong place, remains as relevant as ever. Modern military deception operations use different techniques, including electronic warfare, social media manipulation, and sophisticated disinformation campaigns, but they serve the same basic purpose of causing opponents to make strategic mistakes. The success of Operation Mincemeat also depended on what intelligence professionals call the intelligence cycle, the process of collecting information, analyzing it, and acting on the results. The operation worked because the Germans were efficient at collecting intelligence, but less effective at analysing it critically. They gathered the information from Major Martin's briefcase quickly and efficiently, but they didn't ask enough hard questions about whether it might be false. This pattern of good collection but inadequate analysis remains a common weakness in intelligence organisations today. The challenge of distinguishing reliable information from deliberate deception is as difficult now as it was in 1943, perhaps more so given the volume of information available in the digital age. The human elements of Operation Mincemeat, the personalities and relationships of the people involved, were just as important as the technical aspects. The operation succeeded partly because Montagu and Cholmondeley worked well together, despite their very different backgrounds and temperaments. Their collaboration combined Montagu's legal precision with Cholmondeley's creative imagination, creating a more effective team than either could have been alone. This kind of productive partnership between different personality types and skill sets remains crucial in modern intelligence and military operations. The most successful teams are often those that combine methodical planners with creative thinkers, technical specialists with people who understand human psychology, and detail-oriented analysts with those who can see the big picture. The story of Operation Mincemeat also illustrates the importance of institutional memory and learning from experience. The operation built on lessons learned from earlier deception efforts, and its techniques were later refined and applied to even larger operations like the D-Day deceptions. This kind of institutional learning is crucial for any organisation that wants to improve its effectiveness over time. Modern intelligence agencies, military organisations, and even business enterprises can learn from this example of how to systematically capture, analyse, and apply lessons from both successes and failures. The most effective organisations are those that treat each operation or project as an opportunity to learn and improve. The international dimensions of Operation Mincemeat remind us that even in warfare, success often depends on understanding and working within complex networks of relationships. The operation required the planners to understand Spanish politics, German intelligence procedures, and British diplomatic practices. Success came from skillfully manipulating this network of relationships rather than trying to bypass or ignore it. This lesson about the importance of understanding and working within existing systems applies to many modern challenges, from international diplomacy to business strategy to social change initiatives. The most effective approaches are often those that work with existing institutions and relationships rather than trying to replace them entirely. The role of chance and contingency in Operation Mincemeat also deserves attention. The operation could have failed at numerous points. If Bentley Purchase hadn't found a suitable body, if the Spanish authorities had been more thorough in their examination, if German intelligence had been more skeptical, if Hitler had ignored the intelligence from his subordinates, the planners did everything they could to maximize their chances of success, but they also needed luck. This reminder about the role of chance in human affairs is important for anyone involved in strategic planning. No matter how carefully an operation is planned, unexpected events can always intervene. The most successful strategists are those who plan thoroughly while remaining flexible enough to adapt when circumstances change. The legacy of Operation Mincemeat in popular culture has ensured that the story continues to reach new audiences and generate fresh insights. Each new book, film, or television adaptation emphasizes different aspects of the story, from the technical challenges of intelligence work to the human drama of individuals caught up in historical events. This continued popular interest in Operation Mincemeat reflects broader fascination with stories that combine historical significance with human drama. People are drawn to tales that show how ordinary individuals can become involved in extraordinary events, and how small actions can have large consequences. The educational value of Operation Mincemeat extends beyond military history to fields like psychology, ethics, international relations, and organizational behavior. The operation provides a rich case study for exploring questions about deception, cooperation, leadership, and decision-making under uncertainty. Universities and military academies continue to use Operation Mincemeat as a teaching tool, not just to illustrate historical events, but to explore timeless questions about strategy, ethics, and human behavior. The operation offers lessons that are relevant to anyone who needs to understand how people and organizations make decisions under pressure. As we consider the future implications of Operation Mincemeat's lessons, it's worth reflecting on how the operation fits into broader patterns of historical change. The operation took place at a crucial moment in world history when the outcome of World War II was still in doubt and the future of civilization hung in the balance. The success of Operation Mincemeat contributed to Allied victory, which in turn shaped the post-war world order. The operation was thus part of a larger historical process that determined whether democratic values or totalitarian ideology would dominate the 20th century. From this perspective, even the smallest details of the operation, from Glyndwr Michael's tragic life to the careful crafting of Major Martin's pocket litter, were part of a struggle that would determine the fate of millions. This historical perspective reminds us that our own actions, however small they may seem, are part of larger historical processes whose outcomes are not predetermined. Just as the planners of Operation Mincemeat could not have predicted all the consequences of their work, we cannot know how our current actions will be viewed by future historians. The story of Operation Mincemeat ultimately offers hope about human potential and creativity. When faced with seemingly impossible challenges, the operation's planners refused to accept defeat. Instead, they used imagination, determination, and careful attention to human psychology to create a solution that changed the course of history. This example of creative problem-solving under extreme pressure offers inspiration for anyone facing difficult challenges. The specific techniques used in Operation Mincemeat may not be applicable to modern problems, but the underlying approach, understanding the challenge deeply, thinking creatively about solutions, and executing plans with meticulous attention to detail, remains as relevant as ever. The operation also demonstrates the power of teamwork and collaboration in achieving seemingly impossible objectives. No single individual could have planned and executed Operation Mincemeat successfully. It required the combined efforts of intelligence officers, military personnel, technical specialists, and many others who may never have known the full scope of what they were contributing to. This lesson about the importance of collaboration is particularly relevant in our increasingly connected and interdependent world. Most of the challenges we face today, from climate change to technological disruption to social inequality, require coordinated action by people with diverse skills and perspectives. The example of Operation Mincemeat shows how such collaboration can achieve remarkable results when it is properly organized and motivated. The story of Glyndwr Michael, the forgotten man who became an unlikely hero, serves as a fitting conclusion to our examination of Operation Mincemeat. His life and death remind us that history is shaped not just by famous leaders and dramatic events, but by countless ordinary people whose contributions may never be fully recognized. In death, Glyndwr Michael achieved something that had eluded him in life: significance. His contribution to Allied victory was real and measurable, even though he never knew he was making it. His story suggests that all of us have the potential to make a difference, even if we never know when or how our actions might prove important. The gravestone in Glyndwr that now bears both his real name and his fictional identity serves as a powerful symbol of how individual lives can become part of larger historical narratives. Glyndwr Michael died as a forgotten homeless man, but history remembers him as a hero who helped change the course of World War II. Operation Mincemeat reminds us that in the great struggles between good and evil, freedom and tyranny, hope and despair, victory often depends on the contributions of people who never expected to be heroes. Sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with ideas, creativity, and determination. As we face the challenges of our own time, the story of Operation Mincemeat offers both inspiration and practical guidance. It shows us that seemingly impossible problems can be solved through careful analysis, creative thinking, and determined execution. It demonstrates that collaboration between people with different skills and perspectives can achieve more than any individual could accomplish alone. Most importantly, it reminds us that every person has the potential to make a difference, that every action has consequences, and that the course of history can turn on the smallest hinges. The homeless man who died alone in a London hospital became the key to Allied victory in the Mediterranean. The intelligence officers who spent months crafting a fictional identity helped save thousands of real lives. Their story continues to inspire us more than 80 years later, reminding us that in the face of evil and seemingly impossible odds, human creativity, determination, and sacrifice can still change the world. Operation Mincemeat was more than just a successful military deception. It was proof that the power of human imagination and cooperation can overcome even the most formidable challenges. In our own time of global challenges and uncertainty, we can take inspiration from the example of those who planned and executed Operation Mincemeat. They faced their moment of crisis with creativity, determination, and an unwavering commitment to doing whatever was necessary to defend the values they held dear. They remind us that each of us, in our own way and in our own time, has the opportunity to make a difference. The corpse that changed D-Day was more than just a homeless man's body washed up on a Spanish beach. It was the culmination of human ingenuity, international cooperation, and individual sacrifice. It was proof that in the darkest hours of human conflict, light can still shine through the creativity and determination of people who refuse to accept defeat. That light continues to shine today, illuminating the path forward for all of us who face our own challenges and uncertainties. The story of Operation Mincemeat reminds us that history is not made only by the famous and powerful, but by ordinary people who find themselves called to do extraordinary things. In life or in death, in large ways or small, we all have the potential to help change the world. And sometimes, as Glyndwr Michael proved, the most unlikely heroes are the ones who make the greatest difference of all. Thank you for joining me on this journey through one of World War II's most remarkable stories. If you enjoyed learning about Operation Mincemeat and the incredible true story of how a homeless man's corpse helped change the course of history, please like this video and subscribe to Calm War Stories for more fascinating tales from the world of military history. Until next time, remember that history is full of surprises, and heroes come in the most unexpected forms.